Hi everyone, welcome back to Game Maker Cast. It's Mickey, and in today's video lesson, we're going to be working on another Games Over Lunch. This is a game that we're going to be creating here where we fall down from an airplane, hopefully avoid the seagulls because they are the worst, and at the very end, after we are done collecting coins, hopefully come close to the bullseye, which I am not close at all, where we can score some extra points. So let's roll the intro and let's get right into it. So you can download the starter project in the description below, and you can get the full source code if you're a Patreon supporter or on itch.io. Now let's check out the room setup that we have. I'm using a room initialize and then a room main. I normally do this so that my room initialize will have all of my global variables and anything that needs to run throughout the game. You can see that we only have one object here, and if I open it up, we have a global level, health, and coins, so this is going to be accessible throughout our game. We also are going to create a object music here, and if we take a look at it, we want to make sure that's persistent so it will travel the different rooms. The final thing we do is we just go to the room main. So we can close this room and we can actually open up room main. So in the main room here, I have all of my layers hidden, and we'll just unhide them one at a time. I'll start off with the camera because that's just pretty simple. We have our camera object, and if we open it up this way, you can see that we are just going to follow a target. So we're looking for the first player, and this will happen after we get ejected from the airplane. And then we're just going to move along the Y position down following that actual target. The next thing we have is our GUI, and I won't even go into that. That's just displaying the text for how many hit points we have and the number of coins that we selected. Now, if we take a look at the background here, you can see that I'm tiling a sprite. You don't have to tile the sprite. You could have just used a color, but I had this in my sprite editor, so it was just easier to save. The other backgrounds that we have is we have an extremely large background here that stretches all the way from the top all the way to the bottom. Now, one thing I want to point out is my room size is 512 by 4096. And that's the same size as this graphic. So I had to go into my game options here because I'm exporting two windows. I had to go into Windows and Graphics and change my texture page size. By default, it's 2048, and I had to up it by just one to go to 496. If you don't do that, GameMaker will take this graphic and just basically stretch it down for you, and that's not what we want. The next thing we have here is we have our assets for the ground, and we also have the asset for the bushes. The other thing I want to point out is the room size. We have 512 by 496, but you'll notice that white square at the top, so that means that we are using a viewport. We're going to be using the viewport 0 here, and you can see that the camera, this little white box, is 512 by 512, and if I run the game, it will be the exact same size. So that's our white box is our camera that will move up and down. Now, the very first thing we see is this airplane here, so that's on the player level. Let's actually open them up with the objects here, and let's check them out. So some pretty basic stuff. We set the mouse cursor to hidden, so there isn't any, and then we just set the mouse to the middle of our game. The step event, we move the airplane over to the right, and once our airplane is bigger or equal to half the room width, then we have to insert the player. So there's two ways that we could do this. We could look for the player object, which is this guy here, and if the player object is not instantiated or not found in our room, then we could add it in. The other thing that I like to do is just add a Boolean, and we can toggle this Boolean on or off. So in the create event, we can write a Boolean. We could say has spawned player, and let's set this to false. And in the step event, we could check to see if this equals false. So we could say if that equals false, then let's come in here. We only want it to happen once, so we'll set that Boolean to true. And now all we need to do is create the player. So I will use instance create depth because I'm not using specific layers in this case. I'm going to use the room width divided by 2 to get it in half the room. I'll use the current position of our airplane, which is Y. I want it to appear underneath, so I'll just say plus 64. I'll use the current depth, and what I want to spawn in is the object player. Now with that code, our airplane will move to the right, and then once it hits the room, half the room, it'll check this Boolean, and if it's set to false, which it will be the first time, it will spawn the player, and then it gets set to true, so it will never come back in here. The last little bit of code is if our airplane goes outside of the room, it'll just be destroyed. So with this, let's actually open up the player and have a look at something here. In the step event of the player, you can see that we have horizontal movement, vertical movement, facing direction, and all the way here at the bottom, we have a parachute switch. So right now, this is, to me, it's pretty ugly code, but sometimes there's no way around this. We're basically saying if the Y position is bigger or equal to the room height, which is 4096, minus 196 pixels, then do this information here. So that means that in our room, we would always go all the way down to the bottom and say, okay, so 4096, we go up 196 pixels, and then we have to switch. To me, I don't really like hard coding these values. So what I like to actually do is use zones. And I use those in the top-down shooter in, I believe, an upcoming video. But we're also going to use one here. The reason I'm going to use a zone is because we're going to be spawning in a whole bunch of different things. We have coins, clouds, seagulls, we have the bullseye. But let's take, for instance, these coins. I only want the coins to spawn in a certain area. So what I can do is I can use a zone, and if I pull down my zones, let's see, zone spawner, it's an empty object here. So I can take this zone and I can just drag it in, and let's zoom in a little bit. So this is my zone, and I can just say, I want my zone to start right here and go all the way over. And then I can scroll out and say, I only want my coins and seagulls and birds to be able to spawn right here. So this means that we don't have to come into a room and say, okay, I want my X position to be 37 and going to the right side 473. We don't have to deal with these positions anymore. We can just find this instance and get the left, right, top, and bottom. So let's actually work on one of our spawners here. Let's go into the spawners and go into the coin. First thing we want to do is decide on how many coins that we're going to spawn. So what I decided on is just using a variable called coin count, and I'm going to make it round always up, and it's going to be the global.level times 1.5. So every level we're going to get 1.5 coins. I'm going to make sure I spell that correctly. Coin count. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to find this particular zone in our game. Well, we can do that with instance find. So we could just say instance zone equals instance find. And what do we want to find? We want to find our zone spawner, and we want the first one. I know there's always going to be just one in my game, so I can get away with doing this just fine. Now we could add a little bit of debug code by saying if this equals no one, then what do we want to do? We'll show, let's just say show debug message, and we'll just say error. Now, once we actually do have a zone, we can come down to an else statement here. And this is where our code's going to go for our spawner. So we need to figure out how many times we need to loop. We already have that variable, so we'll just use the repeat function. We'll say repeat for the coin count. So this is going to loop however many coins that we're going to spawn. And now we need to get a random X position between the left side and right side of this instance. And this is very easy because we already have the instance zone at the top. So we could just say XX equals a random range between, and we'll sort this out. We'll say instance zone.bbox left and instance zone.bbox right. So this little bit of code right here is going to give us a random range between the left side and the right side. And we can do this for the top and bottom as well. And now with just this little bit of code, I know that all my spawning that will happen for my coins, clouds, and seagulls is going to happen in this blue area, and I don't have to worry about coming into my room and looking at the X and Y coordinates, say, okay, 44 and 466. I don't have to do that anymore. All I have to do is change my box size, and it will happen automatically. So the only thing we need to do here is actually instantiate one of our coins. So we'll say instance, create depth. At the X and Y position for our random, we'll just use depth -1, and we want to instantiate our coin itself. Now, if we actually take a look at the other coin spawners, or sorry, the other spawners, you can see that we've done this pretty much exactly the same. We're just using different counts for how many clouds and how many seagulls we have. So the next thing we're going to take a look at, or at least I haven't finished here, is the coin itself. So let's go into collectables and let's open up the coin. And whenever our coin collides with the player, we've left this blank. So we need to add a coin, play a sound, and then remove itself. So adding a coin is pretty easy because we are using the global variable. So we'll just say coins plus equals 1. And play sound, normally we would use something like audio play sound, and we would put in the sound clip. But I've made a wrapper here, so I'll just play sound SND coin. And if we take a look at this function here, all it's doing is just checking to see if the sound is currently playing. And if it's not playing, then it will play the clip that we've asked for. And then we need to just remove ourselves from the game. So we'll just destroy this particular instance. Okay, so the other thing that I've left, and let's take a look at our enemy, our seagull here. So the one thing that I have left is whenever our seagull hits our player, we need to only hit the player once, play the sound, and then remove some hit points. So again, we can easily get away with this by using that Boolean flag. So we'll create a new Boolean called has been hit, and we'll set it to false for all of our seagulls. Now in the player, all we have to do is check to see if this has been hit is equal false. If it has not been hit, then we know that we can hit the player. So we'll make the flag say true, and then we'll play our sound, SND hit, and then we remove a hit point from our player. I'm going to remove those comments, and now our seagull is complete. The final thing that I left in this particular thing is if we go into the player and we go to the object zone landing here, you can see in our maximize this, we find the camera and we just remove the target so the camera can't move up or down anymore. We find the bullseye and then we check the distance. So I'm using the absolute value of our current X position, the absolute value of the bullseye's X position. I'm minusing from that and then once again getting the absolute value so I have a positive number. Not the best with math, but I found this works pretty good. So what I want to do is I want to say if the player can land within the distance of 100 pixels, we're going to give the player some coins based off of how close they were to that bullseye. So what we can do is we could loop through the distance that we've landed on. So if our distance between our current X and the bullseye's X is 0, then we should get 100 coins. So we can do this by using a for statement. So we'll just say a for statement. So we'll say var index equals distance, and then as long as our index is less or equal to 100, then what do we want to do? We'll just say index plus plus. So in here, we'll play the sound, SND coin, and then we will add on to our coins itself by 1. So anytime we come within 100, say we're at 90, our index will start at 90 and then it will count upwards until we hit 100. So we should end up with 10 extra coins. Now I'm going to go to my level and I'm going to make sure all of my layers are unhidden here. So we have the zones in here. I need to put the rest of the zones in. Going to work or not, but that's what a Games Over Lunch is all about. So you should be able to hear our music here. And we're going to fall out of the sky. Our mouse is hidden. I can move left and right. And let's see if we can collect any coins. There we go. We got at least 1 coin. So my next objective is hopefully getting that random spot at the bottom. Then 100 pixels. And I did not. All right, so anyway, that is Parachute Jones. I know I didn't go through the entire game, but I just went through some of the things that I thought were pretty cool or a little bit of tidbits that might help you out when you're making other games. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching the video. A special shout out to those who have decided to support me through Patreon. Edward, Andrea, Victor, Darthwolf, Vil, Casper, Robert, Ashby, Ian, and Paul. Again, the downloads can be found in the description below and the full source code is available on itch.io or through my Patreon site.